Hey guys, Coach Kurt. So I'm going to try to make this one a quick one, but you know me, diarrhea of the mouth, gift of gab, and all that bullshit. So let's talk about the use of force and control tactics and how it relates to what you may have or may not have learned at the academy. Now, this video was mostly for my brothers and sisters with my agency. That being said, it's for any agencies whose use of force and control tactics program is based on case law. And by the case law, I mean strictly case law. There's no continuum of force, and your policies and procedures are minimal. And if you do have them, the policies are based around the case law. What case law are we talking about? Well, if you're with my agency, you know we talk about Graham v. Connor. It's a Supreme Court case law. Uh, Graham v. Connor is the most important of all the case laws. That being said, we'll talk about Scott v. Harris, also pretty important, and maybe to a lesser point, we may or may not talk about Tennessee v. Gardner. But Graham v. Connor, according to the Supreme Court, because cops love to overthink stuff, and that's the point of this video, overthinking things. Graham v. Connor is the case law that rules them all. Scott v. Harris is also a very good case law, and we'll discuss that. But I've done a video on this before, and this is important because it just keeps coming up, and it just came up again. What am I talking about? Do you have to only use techniques that you learned at the academy? Well, the answer is absolutely no. We know from Graham v. Connor, the only thing that the Supreme Court says is important was it objectively reasonable. Can you define that? There's no capability or precise definition or capability to precisely define what is reasonably objective, but you should know it when you see it, and that goes to the reasonable officer standard. Could a reasonable officer believe that what went down was absolutely reasonable? 100 officers might do it 100 different ways. That's completely fine as long as it's reasonable. What do we see missing in all of those explanations? Well, it doesn't say anything that it has to be reasonable and techniques you learned at your academy. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to think that you have to use techniques taught to you by your academy or even your control tactics instructors. It only has to be objectively reasonable. Why is this so important? Well, you know that there's a curriculum at the academy. Well, they have to teach you something, so they come up with a curriculum that seems reasonable and is simple to teach, and that's all great and dandy, and you have to do something, so that's what you do. But I have had, well over 13 years now of training police officers in control tactics, and now I'm also a use of force instructor, and the two connect absolutely. But right now we're talking about the exact techniques that I teach. I can show a variation of a technique 3 or 4 different ways based on the build and capabilities of that officer. If I have a 5'3" female that weighs 120 pounds soaking wet, I'm going to have to show a technique differently, or I may not even show the same technique to her, but it's going to have the same concepts, all concepts that you need, and we'll say a takedown of some sort. It doesn't matter what kind of takedown or throw you're teaching. It has to have the ability to off balance the subject, and it has to have the ability to take the subject to the ground. You can't take them to the ground without off balancing them. It's one is connected to the other. And we know from previous videos that there are 8 directions of off balancing. It doesn't matter if you sweep the leg from the rear or you sweep the leg from the front. I can't show you 8 different techniques. So I teach you the concept of you have to take their kazushi. That's a Japanese term for off balancing. You got to take their balance, and then you sweep. You take them down, throw them, however or whatever the technique is. I hope I'm making myself perfectly clear. You got to remember there are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. You've got shoulder throws, arm throws, hand throws, legs throws, sweeps, takedowns, wrestling style takedowns, judo style takedowns. The list goes on forever and ever and ever and ever. Using Taiho Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, all these different systems, they have a lot of things in common as far as grappling, joint manipulation, and takedowns and throws. There are so many flavors under the sun, and they're all effective if used in the proper context. Again, it doesn't matter how you take the balance. It doesn't matter how you get them to the ground. It just has to be objectively reasonable. And I can tell you that the academy I went to has made it perfectly clear. When I went back to do use of force like a year or two ago, I went back to get certified as a use of force instructor as well as being a control tactic instructor. They made that perfectly clear in the training. At least that's how I perceived it. And I think it was pretty black and white that, listen, we only care about the case law. And the most important case law is Graham v. Connor. And again, to a lesser point, and a good example is Scott v. Harris. Scott v. Harris is a case law based on the pit maneuver. I did a video that I used the pit maneuver as an example because a vehicle was pit. They were trying to pit a vehicle in the video, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I get off track. But long story short, the person that was getting pitted by the deputy, the pit went wrong, the vehicle rolled, and they crashed. And his lawyer said, well, it was deadly force and shouldn't have been done. Well, it was based on watching the video. The justices of the Supreme Court said, hey, yeah, it was justified. It was a very dangerous encounter that the deputies were involved in. This guy was being crazy on the road, putting society in general in danger and the officers in danger, blah, blah, blah. And they thought, rightly so, that the individual needed to be stopped. So they said, yes, deadly force was authorized. Now, also coming up in that situation, or that case law, is that the deputy wasn't trained to do pit. He was authorized by a sergeant to attempt it because it was that dangerous, but it went wrong. But it goes back to them saying, listen, deadly force is authorized in this case. It doesn't matter how it happened. It doesn't matter if you drop a piano on their head, if you hit them with a meteor, you shoot them with your firearm. You get the idea. You might carry a folding knife on duty. Were you taught at the academy to use a folding knife? I can guarantee about 99% of all cops that are working in the United States carry some kind of folding knife. It's just what we do. They're great tools. You weren't taught to use that folding knife. Well, in some cases you have. My agency, I remember doing a training several years back that incorporated using the folding knife as a last-ditch self-defense type tool. As you should. If you carry something like that and intend to use it in that manner, you should become familiar with bladed weapons, impact weapons. You get the idea. I get sidetracked. Sorry. But does your agency say you're allowed to carry a folding knife? Probably not. There's probably no policy that says you're allowed to carry a folding knife because it's just kind of assumed that everybody just carries folding knife. There's no reason to make it a policy. And what's important is if the officer does use that it's done objectively reasonable based on the situation. You run somebody over with your patrol car. We've seen incidences like that. Or you use your patrol car as a weapon because you have to. Somebody's shooting into a crowd and you're coming up on the scene. You're not going to get out and use your weapon. You're just going to take the person out. You weren't taught that at the academy. But was it objectively reasonable to do that? Yes, it is. That's all that matters. Don't get hung up in the minutia.
We didn't have time to work out the minutia of the plan.
This was not a technique. The officer did a technique that if you're a supervisor and you're reading a report and judging the report and it's a use of force report and the officer did some technique, the way he explains it or the way she explains it isn't a technique that was taught at the academy, that's neither here or there. It shouldn't matter to you. Only thing that should matter to you and your agency was it objectively reasonable the manner in which that officer used the technique. That's it. Nothing more. Stop. You get way up into the weeds and start making it way more complicated than it needs to be if you start digging in like, well, it has to be academy technique. No, it does not. So I think I'm going to wrap this up because I'm on the soapbox. But again, this came up recently. and it surprises me how often this comes up from people who are super good cops, super bright, good supervisors I've over the years I've had worked with, and then they come to me as a use of force instructor or a control tax instructor, say, "Hey, this officer did this. Was this okay?" Well, yeah, it's absolutely okay, but it wasn't taught at the academy. Does not matter. Does not matter. Only matters if it was objectively reasonable. Okay, I pounded it into your head, guys and gals. I apologize. I get heated about these things because I'm passionate about training people and making sure that we do the job the way we're supposed to do it. Anyway, everybody take care, stay safe, and have a good day.
Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out.